Okay, let's get started. Hello, and thank you officially for joining today's webinar, Governments That Get IT Right. Today, we're going to spend less than an hour talking about the challenging IT environments of jurisdictions, and we'll show examples of governments that have overcome difficulties and figured out ways to deliver services without massive budgets. If you have some questions that you want to ask, there's the Q&A feature at the top of your screen. You can also use the chat feature to communicate with us, or you can send us an email at webinars@avenuinsights.com, and we will respond to you right away. So let's get started here with some introductions. I'm Chris Orand, your moderator today from Avenu Insights and Analytics. With me on the presentation is Ben Miller, the Associate Editor of Data and Business for GovTech magazine. Ben covers daily stories on technological advances, big data, smart cities, the Internet of Things, and more public technology issues. Among GovTech's popular features is the GovTech 100. Ben was a big part of pulling together this list of leading companies focused on and making a difference in state and local government. The list, of course, is alphabetical, but that doesn't stop people around the office here from saying that Avenu is number 8 out of 100. So where they find these marketing people, I really don't know, but we're moving right along. Our other panelist today is Roger Murphy, who leads Avenu's IT Services Group. Roger's credentials cover IT program and project management, transformation and change strategy, IT cost optimization, application portfolio management, and infrastructure modernization. Among his career highlights is the operational responsibility he had for the largest local government outsourcing contract for the city of San Diego. Here's a more specific breakdown of what we're going to cover today. We'll have some details about who Avenu is and why we're qualified to bring you this information today, the challenges facing local governments, IT's role in meeting those challenges, examples of governments being resourceful in meeting expectations, and considerations for replicating their success. We'll also have a question and answer session and a special offer for you attendees. We appreciate your time today and want to make it extra valuable with a complimentary offer that ties directly to today's content. So let's get started. Who is Avenu? Avenu is a solution provider that boosts revenue, optimizes operations, and deepens community trust for 3,000 state and local government customers. Under the revenue enhancement side of the business, this covers finding new revenue from business tax payments that are misallocated to jurisdictions, for example, or through compliance audits for various fees and taxes, such as unpaid or underreported hotel or utility fees. We help jurisdictions understand and forecast their revenue with our analytics platform, and we help many states facilitate the processing of unclaimed property that can lead to new revenue. Our administration solutions include processing of tax and license fees for cities and counties, solutions for managing historical, vital, and other public records, court case and jury management for judicial systems, and administration of property taxes and pension plans. Our IT Managed Solutions Group supports local governments with functions for help desk, applications, disaster recovery and security, hosting, and cloud enablement, among others. So let me set the stage here and look at the mission of governments. This in itself can present a challenge when trying to deliver services equally to all citizens. It sounds elementary, but government affects all citizens. It's very different from a corporate perspective where you target segments of a population. Every citizen is a recipient of some government service, even if it's using the sidewalk. And online, there are many computer users who can contact City Hall or county leadership to complain, offer praise, or just comment. So it's important to keep technology functioning for citizen engagement. It's very different from the days of phone calls and letter writing because it's just easier and it's faster to do. Obviously, there's no profit motive in government. That means that decisions are made differently. All of a budget can be spent on a program instead of saving some to improve a bottom line, for example. So in fact, if you don't spend everything that you have, there's a risk that next year you're only going to get the same amount that you spent because it's assumed that you didn't need it all. The third point here, IT has become indispensable to government. Anything from dispatching snowplows to paying taxes to running parks all needs IT. But government still has to fight for resources and be creative to get their tasks done. This last point, I want to kick it over to Ben Miller. Ben, you raised the issue of how complexity challenges adoption and service delivery early in our discussions. Do you want to, can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. So I wanted to share something that I picked up from a man named Dave Guarino. He is an alumnus from Code for America, helped set up the Get Cal Fresh program in California that was all about making it easier for people to determine whether they're eligible for food stamps and then apply for them. And the concept is called rationing by friction. And I think it's pretty central here when we're talking about how IT fits into the mission of government and why it's so important, because the concept essentially of rationing by friction is that the harder a process is, the less likely a given person is to make it all the way through that process, whether it's applying for a benefit that somebody is entitled to, somebody trying to get all the permits they need to start a business, something as simple as registering their pet. If it's a really complicated process, if it requires a lot of paperwork that somebody has to go dig up, if they have to travel to get there, if it takes a lot of time, every layer of complexity that you add actually degrades the value of that service. It degrades how likely people are to actually use it in a meaningful way. And so IT, technology in general, is important because it can help to reduce the actual complexity layers that are preventing people from being served well by the government, or it can add to them.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ben. Let me move on here and summarize another challenge. There's some compelling statistics around engagement and satisfaction levels. One report by Accenture says that 58% of citizens are satisfied with their digital government services. Of course, the corollary to that is that 42% are not satisfied, so there's some work to be done there. Another interesting statistic is that only 19% have reached out to elected officials. And other points in this National Research Center piece said that only 25% of citizens have attended a meeting, and that in general, citizens are more inclined to be engaged when something is wrong. So that's something to take note of. This last point from the Institute for Public Sector Engagement deals with employee engagement. Both the government and the private sector have historically had low engagement, 30 and 34% respectively. And this can contribute to negative impressions that citizens can have of their government, and it affects service delivery if attitudes and environment are such that tasks and deadlines get pushed. So a takeaway here, digital government has become more important. In fact, 70% of governments acknowledge that their digital technology usage is not acceptable. So there's a gap there, and offering more services digitally will bridge that gap and increase engagement. One more setup here is let's talk about the reality of resources. Clearly, revenue growth is not matching cost growth, as this National League of Cities report shows. And the story is much the same in counties. And this is in a time of relatively low unemployment and in a good economy, two criteria that historically have resulted in governments paying down debt and adding to rainy day funds. So at some point, government is going to struggle to meet the obligations that it has traditionally offered. So where does this leave us? With all these challenges, is IT a savior, or is it a culprit? Clearly, citizens want more services. There needs to be more IT security. There's lots of data and requirements to comply with, and governments have to figure out whether to keep the legacy systems they have or migrate them. And governments find it difficult to acquire and maintain IT skill sets, and also to match private sector salaries. So the answer to how well IT meets or creates challenges depends on the circumstances. Depends on what's being accomplished now, depends on what is planned and how well it's being implemented. But for certain, IT is at the center of changing government, and in fact, like many changes, it's been more of an evolution than a revolution. So let's look at a few examples here of where IT fits in this landscape. Roger, can you walk us through, Roger Murphy from Avenu, can you walk us through what you see as evolving expectations in this slide?
Yes, our expectations are changing, right? And the first thing is that citizens want the same experience with government that they have in the private sector. They also want easy access to government services. I got a parking ticket a little over a year ago, And even though the officer was at my car and I was able to prove to him that the meter was broken, he still issued me a ticket. And what that meant to me was I had to contest it, which was a manual process, required me to call the court each week, and I was told at the beginning that it would take up to 270 days for them to resolve it. Now, it was eventually found in my favor a couple of months after it was issued, but I have to compare that to Amazon, Starbucks, Lyft, or other experiences where I receive a product or service, and my expectations, my experience is very positive. So, we as citizens are bringing that consumer reference to our interaction with government. Our expectations around services and goods are also changing in the way we purchase them. Statistics show that government websites have had 10% more mobile traffic since 2016. Overall mobile traffic to sites is at 45% currently. And from a consumer view, more traffic goes across the internet from mobile devices than desktops currently. And that trend will continue, certainly when we get to 5G. Citizens want to engage anytime, anywhere, from any device. We're seeing in government a shift to move towards IT procurements that package up the delivery of service, and that would be the infrastructure, applications, security ops, and regulation compliance elements into a service that government can then purchase. We also, from an expectation perspective, we expect AI to help us. Siri, Alexa, conversational bots are commonplace now. Take note of the numbers in the graphic of those now using AI. We're at a point in time where we have the capability that allows us to create and or deliver service to the citizens differently than we've done so in the past. And using AI and machine learning are examples of this. But these capabilities are in everything from your car to your refrigerator, but with any new capability, there's unintended consequences. Behind AI, for instance, there's many areas that need attention currently. How to secure, categorize, use, and optimize the data that's collected, for example. What's the retention and access policy for that data? And then, is there inherent bias in AI? And I think, if you look out there, there are examples where we're finding there is, in fact, bias. So I think it leads us to a larger question, right? And that question is, what's government's role with these changing expectations? And our view is that government has to be the authority that sets policy. That should not be outsourced. Governments need to stay close to this item, make sure they're using the data and the citizen confidential information they have in a secure way, and that any use of AI is actually increasing productivity or it's enhancing service to the citizen. And then I think finally, as we see the move to 5G and the associated collection of massive amounts of data, this will continue to be a critical area for us to focus on.
And I wanted to...
Thank you. Yeah,
sorry.
Ben, if you could elaborate on some of these stats that they came from your publication, I know, it'd be helpful to add some of this context.
On the AI stats?
Yeah, the AI stats, and then some of the other statistics that you had referred to.
Sure. Well, the AI statistic that comes from our digital city survey, which gathers survey responses from a lot of cities around the country every year, telling us essentially what they're doing. We were a little bit surprised by this, actually, the high percentage that were either already using or planning to use AI. And I think part of the reason for that is that it's really an overlay technology. It can be worked into a lot of different things. And so, we mentioned digital assistants earlier. That is a relatively, early form of AI. It's starting to get everywhere and can be used in, relatively minor ways so that we get comfortable with it over time and sort of can build on practical uses of it as opposed to, what we see in the movies. We're at an interesting kind of point right now also where AI is not only giving us the ability to crunch data more effectively, to recognize patterns more quickly and more deeply, but we're also getting a lot more opportunities for collecting data. I wanted to share some examples of that. And this can be done in ways that actually essentially gathers data for public uses more quickly and cheaply than was able to do in the past. I think of the bulk of the Internet of Things as smartphones. For example, there's a company out there called Streetlight Data that offers traffic counts for streets and intersections gathered from location data shared from smartphones. And it doesn't have to be, every smartphone going through an intersection or to paint an accurate picture. It can just be, a small random sampling. It can be anonymized relatively easily and then aggregated so that you can get data on how many cars are traveling through an intersection just automatically and on demand, as opposed to sending out a crew to observe and to set up devices to collect that data. Smartphones also can gather video, which now we have artificial intelligence to recognize objects in that video. A company that's doing this in interesting ways called Roadbotics. And what they do is you can take video from, any source, but also a smartphone mounted on a dash cam on a car, drive around town, gather all this footage of a street, and run it through software that will recognize cracks that might become potholes soon, and also catalog potholes, create a map to essentially let a city or a county or state know where they need to focus their efforts. Finally, we have some kind of passive data collection efforts going on in cities right now. When you think about kiosks, there's a company called Sufa. They make the e-ink displays that can go up in parks and other public spaces. They also make a solar-powered smart bench that you can plug your phone into and charge it. These can also collect data passively on foot traffic through an area, which helps, for example, parks and rec departments understand peak hours and things like that. But there is a bit of a concern when it comes to privacy, especially with these devices, because there are ways that data can be used to identify individuals, even when it does seem like it's being gathered anonymously, especially when it comes to location data. If you see, for example, the same trip happening from point A to point B at the same time every day, it often doesn't take a whole lot of educated guessing before you can figure out who a person is. So just, something to keep in mind as we're talking about this.
Thanks, Ben. Roger, the point about the last point about demographics, how can the audience reconcile the differences among their citizens and, how they consume information in different ways?
Well, I'll give you a personal example. I have a son who's a millennial and I'm a boomer. And I will guarantee you we have different expectations. More boomers, I think, are familiar with, paper, face-to-face interaction. Other younger generations, I personally believe they could almost engage totally in a digital way. And I think at the end of the day, governments are going to have to cater to both. But over time, digital engagement is going to win.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on here. Roger, back to you. Talking about security here, it's in its central role in digital government. Can you outline the landscape as you see it?
Sure. I think we have a trust crisis. We have to trust the technology we deploy. We have to trust the governance of the data, ensure the policies are being followed, and the citizens' private information is kept confidential. And that's a balance that we're all trying to achieve. There's a greater demand for transparency in government. Without it, there's no trust. And without trust, nothing works. But at the same time, we deeply care about our privacy. And if you don't believe that, just hand your phone over to the person next to you and give them your passcode. We live in a multi-threat environment. Threats are both internal and external. And many agencies we talk with, they do not have a great security posture. That includes security policy, security architecture, and security operations. And in addition, we see the threats are becoming more sophisticated. The skills and tools needed to prevent, detect, and respond to attacks are specialized. And many organizations just can't keep up with the pace of the change and the associated threats. We also know that local governments and individuals' reputations are on the line. I don't think there's a better example currently than the Atlanta ransomware attack, where it was revealed there were some 2,000 vulnerabilities. 6 million people were affected, and there's months of disruption. I did read recently, I think it could cost as much as $17 million to resolve that. The data point that's not talked about, commonly is that the original Bitcoin ransom was only $52,000 in Bitcoin. But I think the message is we have to move to a best practice strategy, prevention, detection, and recovery. And at the end of the day, you're going to have to invest in that. You can do that by building internal certified capability, or you can partner with someone you trust. And it's certainly a capability that we at Avenu have invested in and use to help our customers every day. You also have some other options, right? We understand that you may have access to free tools and capability from Homeland Security and others, but you may not have the people to implement, and that's an area where we can help you as well.
Yeah, and I definitely agree that the threats are becoming more sophisticated. You're seeing a lot of kind of scary stories out there. At the same time, we do have quite a bit of good evidence that government is moving in the direction of taking this more seriously and putting more resources in place. I wanted to share a couple stats from a 2018 joint study between Deloitte and the National Association of State CIOs on cybersecurity that they performed in 2016 and then again in 2018. And over those 2 years, they found a 22% increase in organizations that had defined governance for cybersecurity. So this is, defined responsibilities, policies, standards, procedures, jumped from 58% defined governance to 80% defined governance. We're talking about states here specifically, but generally a good assumption when states do something that you're going to see similar trends in cities and counties. Another statistic that came from that same study was that between 2016 and 2018, the percentage of respondents with no formal established authority for a chief information security officer dropped from 12% to 2%. If you're thinking about 50 states, 2% is basically one state. The percent of respondents that had statutory authority for a chief information security officer rose from 49% to 63%. And meanwhile, just from our own statistics here at GovTech, we know that about 60% of cities have reported having cyber insurance. So there is a little bit of a bright light here in the sense that government in the U.S. is definitely putting more resources behind cybersecurity and gearing up to make it more of a permanent and ongoing concern that they're addressing.
Roger, let's go down a layer and talk to us about what we're seeing here in terms of the environment for IT specifically.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of disruptive change out there, right? And there's limited resource to meet the abundant need that's out there. And our expectations are changing, as we previously discussed. Most of the resource that's available is used to keep the lights on, to deliver the required service to the citizen. And specifically in regard to innovation, it's difficult to get funding, as the numbers show. Decisions depend on revenue and funding. Commitments are not guaranteed from year to year, which is always a challenge. Many times the contracts are short-term focused, meaning that a strategic change is hard to maintain over time. And often there's scope creep, cost overruns, project delays as well. There's also a high cost to maintaining legacy systems. You just can't rip and replace these because they're highly customized. The workflow is often embedded in the organization. So, ultimately you couldn't replace it with a commercial off-the-shelf solution. And it's equally hard to find staff, such as those, who know COBOL, Fortran, for old systems. And if you can find them, you probably need more than one person. In addition, right, there's a need for mobile enablement. And we talked about that previously, right, that, there's a trend in the market where more and more interactions occurring over mobile telephones. Many legacy technologies still function, but they're not mobile enabled. To add that functionality requires significant customization, or in many cases, you might have to replace the application entirely. So, our customers, those we talk about with the industry, tell us that it's hard for them to find and replace staff that have the skill for older technologies, let alone compete for folks that have the skill for mobile frameworks, cloud frameworks, .NET, Java, et cetera, where everybody wants to be today. They just can't attract, develop, or retain that talent. So, if you're struggling in this area, we at Avenu have significant development and support capability for both legacy applications for modernization, mobile enhancement, and new development. It's one of the core things we do, and because of that, we certainly understand the culture. We know that innovation and change require strong leadership and ultimately strong, capable partners.
Okay, let's talk. Where does this lead us, or where are we leading this? Ben's got a couple of examples that he wants to roll through on how IT is actually delivering on the promise for better service. Ben, do you want to elaborate on technology innovation here?
Yeah, so, you know, one of the things I like a lot about my job is that I get to write about such a broad range of what's happening in state and local government across the U.S. And there are a lot of examples that I've come across of people who get really innovative with technology and are able to radically change what they're doing or cut costs in a big way or make themselves so much more efficient while still working with the legacy environment that they have been working with for so long, either by kind of routing around it or by laying new technology on top of it that works with the older stuff. So one of them was there was a permitting process that I heard about in San Francisco. Had to do with building inspection. And the problem was that you had all of these inspectors from different departments, all with their own little paper checklists going through and checking things. And in order to figure out what the other inspectors were doing, they had to communicate back with their home office, which was working on these old Oracle databases, two separate databases, in fact, where the same permit or the same permit holder would have two different numbers. And what they essentially did, they gave their inspectors tablets to bring into the field with them, number one, so that they could get information from back in the office while they were in the field. And then they ran it through a software as a service called Building Eye, which was pulling all of the information that they needed. And for example, if somebody is performing an inspection in a building and they say, this is, you know, everything looks good except I need you to fix this sprinkler, and I don't know whether you're actually doing that, they can actually check for the person who already came in and inspected that and see, oh, okay, they have a permit in now to fix that sprinkler, so I can go ahead and sign off on this right now, rather than going back to the office and checking on this while also needing to do all these other inspections, and then, you know, maybe I'll get back to you in a week, maybe not, depends. We're seeing a lot of new mobile apps for emergency responders specifically, and a big part of this is because of the FirstNet system that's been set up across the U.S. They've actually created a verification or validation process for apps for police officers and other emergency responders to use. An interesting one that I've written about is a company called Collio that likes to run some of its services on freemium models. So you have a free tier and then a premium model where you get a little bit more storage or a little bit more support or something. They're using smartphones as essentially an alternative to a body camera for a police officer, to where you can stream using their service, not have to worry about taking up all the space on your phone, not have to worry about the security of it or anything like that, and have video without actually needing to get a body camera. And you can also loop people in on the stream. Collio and a lot of other companies are also working on getting the location of 911 callers to the dispatch centers so that you can see without the person telling you if the call gets cut off or something, or if there's some communication issue, where the call is coming from, and then give that to the people who are responding to the call so that they can actually go directly to where it's coming from rather than, you know, driving around a block looking for a person. And then last, just wanted to talk about the impacts that some user experience design can have, and that sometimes, you know, it's as simple as updating a user interface or coming up with a new user interface. This goes back to the idea of rationing by friction. A lot of that friction, the complexity that comes from citizens especially using services, is built into the user interface, and whether or not it's confusing and the terminology makes sense, or whether the process makes a lot of sense or is intuitive, or whether you might be able to improve things a little bit. An interesting company in this space is Seamless Docs. which the core of their business has always been turning PDFs or forms that a government has into interactive web content to where you can enter into an individual field using your keyboard. You can drag and drop documents that need to be put into place instead of mailing them or bringing them in to a counter, that sort of thing. And then a lot of other companies, Symbiom is one of them, Camino is another. There's a company called iDevelopCity that I've talked to. They're all working on helping people find zoning maps of cities and being able to filter those so that you can only see areas of the city where a specific zoning requirement is met, or you can search, or you can break things down by color. You can color code different zones and that sort of thing.
Okay, thank you. How about services, Ben?
Yeah, it's not just products. There are a lot of services out there that can help government work with what they have more effectively. There was one city that submitted to our 2018 Digital City Survey where they said that they were, and this was a relatively large city, but they were able to save $300,000 annually simply because they put a software as a service program in place that monitored energy usage on 11,000 computers across the enterprise and reduced the power that they used when they were idle. It's pretty passive. It's unobtrusive. It doesn't change what anybody's doing necessarily, but it's just kind of the slow-hanging fruit that saves money without inconveniencing people. We hear a lot about counties working with electronic ballots and for voting. And this is a little bit controversial, but there was one county in our Digital Counties survey last year that had a little bit of a less controversial approach to it, which was with sample ballots. So before the actual election, there's a mandate to send out sample ballots to voters. But it doesn't necessarily need to be done by prints, depending on how laws are written. One county was able to save $1.5 million per year just by allowing citizens to request e-ballots instead of physical ones that had to be mailed with postage in this big, bulky package. We've also had a lot of people in our surveys talk about monitoring programs, billing and usage reviews that give them indications about how much their computers and telephones and software licenses are being used. Sometimes something as simple as consolidating two people who have a license for the same program onto one license can save a lot of money without really changing anything. And then last, we always come back to shared services, and people joining together to share IT resources. Maybe one person takes over the responsibility for the fiber network. Maybe one person takes over responsibility for the help desk. Maybe people pool their resources for the same fiber network, and then they're able to work together more effectively, whether that's through their library system or emergency response. Working together with the people who are around you, and city-county collaborations can often lead to a lot of good results.
Roger, anything to add to those stories?
Well, I think as I mentioned earlier, right, we see in procurement within government, RFPs that are coming out where they want to combine technology and services into a single service, and thereby pushing risk and operational delivery to the service providers. And the National Association of Counties, for instance, has a guide on its website for shared services, among others. But that's a trend we certainly see.
Okay. How about strategy, Roger? Can you talk to these couple of examples?
I was talking with somebody recently, and the individual, she said, we hate change, but we hate the status quo. And I think as technologists, we all deal with that, right? There's an increasing demand for services from residents, commuters, travelers, businesses, suppliers, and consumers. And in many cases, the existing capabilities and processes do not work. So from an innovation perspective, we believe that, at its foundation, you should build on what you have if possible. Innovation has risk, so you should have a technology view of innovation, but also an organizational view of innovation, i.e., how will all of this work? What problem are we solving? Is the solution that we're proposing, can that be adopted in our environment? When you're past that, you absolutely have to ensure that those elements are mapped to your strategic vision and your plan. So if you look at a customer that we had, located in Carrollton, Texas, for instance, they want to move away from a traditional data center and network architecture where they had to design, purchase, build, deploy, and operate that environment, and they were caught in that cycle, every 4 years. And we worked with them to move to, an infrastructure as a service model where they achieved certain efficiencies. More importantly, they got capability that they did not have previously, both around performance and capacity, and it also established a platform for growth. And that growth could be, cloud, hybrid, local processing closer to the citizen. And, at the end of it, we were able to achieve, significant savings in doing so. Another example is customer location in Palmdale, California, where they had a security posture that they wanted us to look at, and we helped them with their security policy, architecture, and ultimately the operations component, so they provided enhanced security capability for them. So, we don't believe that you ought to implement technology for technology's sake. We think it's important that you understand the challenge, the context of that challenge, and the need behind it, and then use technology to address it.
Okay, thank you, Roger. I just want to remind everybody we're in the home stretch here. We're coming up on that offer we're going to make shortly here, but we've got one more section to give you some more context here. And Roger, I'd like you to take the lead on this here. If you could just describe the approach that you found most useful in guiding governments toward this sort of land of innovation as we see it here.
Yeah. I probably say this once a day, right? What problem are we trying to solve? And if you start with that, the next question is, how do you get there? All right. So if we understand the problem instead of the solution we want to use, we certainly have a foundation to work from that's successful. Typical problems that we see out there are access to capital, legacy modernization, access to a skilled workforce, better security. A lot of organizations want to have better citizen engagement, might not have insight into your data, or you just want better service. We recently, some of my team and I went to a Smart Cities conference, so maybe you're beginning to undertake Smart Cities initiatives. But it really starts with a problem definition. And that has to be followed with a compelling business case that's outcome focused. And ultimately, for those of you on the phone, you have to provide strong leadership. But it's equally important that up front at the beginning, we define success, right? And that can be both short-term and long-term because it will change over time. And if at all possible, I encourage everyone to use metrics in defining, what does success look like. We live in a world where, for many of us, you have to state your name for the record, you have to stand before a council or a board, and you have to explain how are we using this money, the citizens' money, in a way to deliver better service or to give them capability or better value than they previously had. So as you're talking with key stakeholders, which may include citizens, the expectations have to be clearly established and has to be done so at the beginning. I was at a customer location yesterday, and I heard a CIO yesterday. He was briefing his organization, and he said, communication is at the source of the problem. And I think he's very, he's right about that. And I encourage all of you that, once you get past problem definition, you move into, the compelling business case part of it, that as you provide leadership, you're very clear about expectations, and you communicate early and often. You go to the next slide. So, once you get past all that, right, there are very real needs that we have to meet. And it's important to use the guiding principles I just discussed. If you have a law and justice application, for example, and that application and data must reside on site, then your solution design has to incorporate that constraint. And that means you're going to tell folks or have a conversation that says, I cannot move this application capability or its data to the cloud, which might be a policy, it might be, an executive direction that you've been given. But it's important to really understand the challenge in the context of the possible solution. Our viewpoint is that most organizations have a fragmented delivery capability. It can be fragmented by funding. It can be fragmented due to the silos you have in your organization. So ultimately, you have to ask yourself, can your IT department meet the need? Do you have the in-house capacity, the technology, and the staff to address all the challenges that you have? And if we move on to the next slide, if you answered no to any of those questions, then you may want to consider, as a service as an option for procurement, or build a trust relationship with a capable partner that can help you. On the procurement side, you can push all the delivery responsibility, staff challenges, security risk, and compliance to the vendor. There's certainly contractual mechanisms out there through SLAs or other methods to hold them accountable. In addition, what you would find is you could turn CapEx challenges into operating costs, which ultimately would provide you a predictable run rate going forward. But there's some final considerations, especially in view of emerging technology. There's additional challenge headed our way. There's growth of platforms and platform diversity, laptops, phones, sensors, just about every device that's out there. There's cloud adoption, which has created risk for a lot of organizations we talk with. And we briefly talked about, the Internet of Things, which will certainly converge with IT, and there will be heightened security as well as massive amounts of data collection and data risk that come with that. So your challenge at the end of all this is to balance all of these requirements and to do so with manageable risk. So if you go to the next.
Thank you, Roger.
Yeah.
I'd like to just put a finer point on the takeaway here and call attention to this Standish Group report that says 31% of IT projects are canceled before completion. And I've actually seen other numbers that are much higher. Can you help us understand, why that is and how to avoid it?
Yeah, I think, we've presented you today numerous questions you need to be asking. But we do need to talk about, how we address this from a process perspective. How do we get it done? There's many stats out there, the one Chris just referenced. I've had, PMP certification since I think 2001. I've had large PMOs, within different organizations I've run throughout my career. And it is concerning, right, that many projects start and they ultimately fail. So, at Avenu, as I've referenced, we start with a problem you're trying to solve. From that, we create a strategy, and that strategy forms the foundation, right? So based upon our years of experience and expertise, we have the problems laid out. We build a strategy to address those problems. The very next step is stakeholder engagement. Sometimes that can be, elected officials, it can be appointed folks, it can be citizens, it can be others in the community, but they must be engaged. We need to listen to them early as their sponsorship's critical. And ultimately, if we're going to go for funding, right, or fight for discretionary funding, we absolutely have to have the full support of the stakeholders. And, we have to have that support for your vision and for the plan to be successful. And ultimately, you're not going to be able to move forward without it. From a practical perspective, we recommend you take the top 3 challenges that you face today. You develop a strategic or execution plan with actionable items and focus on that first. That allows you to get early wins, and then a larger narrative can be built from that. So, if you're struggling, with developing your objectives and goals to address the challenges that you have, creating that strategy, building the plan or managing the projects, we can help you.
Okay. Can you talk to us for a minute about governance?
Yeah, well, I think in closing, I think there's a final point, right? We've learned that it's critical that once you get past all of that, right, that you get the approval, you've received the sponsorship, necessary to go implement, that you're successful in implementing the stated outcomes. I mentioned earlier that, some of you, and I know I have from time to time, we stand before electeds and others where we are held accountable. And we certainly want to give them a report that says, we were prudent in our approach, we've solved the problem, our solution was adopted, the way we're delivering services to the citizens is better than it was before, and, we met the objective. So we have found to get there, to that point, you have to keep the stakeholders engaged. You have to have effective governance. We found there's 3 specific governance functions. There's governance at the executive level. There's architecture and technology governance. And then there's, the governance at the actual project level as well. All of those are required to be in place to effectively manage scope, cost, schedule. Look, we understand this business. And then the time of, trying to squeeze every nickel out of every budget, every hour out of the staff, we understand that you, like many of our customers, need help on that journey. We're here to help you. Even if you're confident you're on the right path, we'd still love to talk with you. And Chris, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, thank you. We're at the end of the road here. We've got some time for some questions. Please, I encourage you to submit them either through the chat function or through the Q&A function. While you're queuing those up, I had one that came in earlier during the presentation. Roger, this sounds like it's one for you. You talked earlier about making some capital costs operational. Can you elaborate on that?
Many times when we'll work with a city or a county, there's a fight for capital, right? Or it's not available. And, we'll sit down with our customer and say, look, what is the ongoing operational expense for this capability look like? And let's use, server, storage, other data center components as an example. We'll sit down and say, look, if you're on this treadmill, if you will, that every 4 or 5 years you're going to council or to a board to fight for that capital funding, it's hard to get, you're falling behind. We at Avenu, are willing to say, look, let us take that risk, right? Let us provision that for you, but let's turn that into, a monthly fee over time that's predictable and gets you out of this, kind of bell curve, if you will, that is causing you to go back and forth to council every 4 or 5 years. And, that's a strategy we've seen widely adopted in cities and counties. It's been quite successful. It gives you a predictable run rate. It pushes the risk for provision, the design, build, deploy, operate, pieces of all that to a vendor.
Okay, let me take one more that's come in here. Ben, from your hometown in Sacramento, what's your view on 5G as it stands now?
For me?
Yes, please.
Yeah, Sacramento. Let's go. 5G is interesting, and it's not my exact area of expertise or anything like that. I tend to think that it seems like it's going to enable a lot of kind of future use cases that are not in place right now. And I'm specifically thinking about real heavy loads like video analytics, and that can be applied in so many ways. thinking about things like self-driving vehicles and not just, car fleets or anything like that, but also, there are delivery robots now. There are shuttles that are being deployed to kind of see if they can address the first mile, last mile problem with public transits. Sort of like really heavy use cases like that. Artificial intelligence, as it gets more sophisticated and as more and more data streams start coming up, the Internet of Things also, I think, could be enabled. So I think essentially 5G opens the door to a lot of possibilities. A lot of these are also cutting-edge technologies that we're still kind of figuring out exactly how they'll be used or how useful they'll be.
Yeah, and I'd like to add on, our view at Avenu is it's a catalyst for growth. It's the next step in the evolution. If you look at what happened between 3G and 4G with smartphones, the use of those devices exploded. We know that it's early in 5G. The test beds are live. The official rollouts are coming. Talk to Qualcomm or one of the carriers. They're in every city and county and state, trying to get that capability in the ground. Ultimately, it provides faster, more reliable data connections, low latency, more bandwidth, and it will power, the Internet of Things. It's beyond just connectivity. The interesting thing that I see is that it will expand the Internet to new places. And I don't think we have policy in place to deal with that. So I think for the folks on the phone, you really need to think about what's our policy going to be when we move beyond the phone and we move to other devices. And so we're going to take something that traditionally was not heavily regulated, right, into places that are. Ultimately, what that means from a technology perspective is there's a data wave coming. Ben already, mentioned location information will get better, which has a security link and privacy link to it. There's going to be densification of that, collection. Most of you, if you use GIS, Esri has some great information out there about their vision of collecting all that information for cities and counties and what that means. But ultimately, that whole ecosystem is going to change, and we think that it's going to be disruptive. It's exciting, right, from a technology perspective, but certainly something that will impact all of us.
You bring up a good point about the rise of smartphones, too, between 3G and 4G, and it makes me think, we can't predict the future in terms of hardware or software, but, knowing that there's another leap in connectivity coming, if there is, continues to be more innovation in those arenas, then that means potentially more changes in expectations from the average person when it comes to the services and technology that they're using every day. And, with those changing expectations also comes new ideas for government as well as new technology that might be useful to solve problems that are tougher to crack right now.
All right, gentlemen, thank you. We want to make sure we get everybody on the line out of here before the hour is up. So the other questions that have come through, we'll respond to you via email. And if your questions, you have some questions that you haven't submitted, you can still send them to us at webinars@avenuinsights.com. So we've reached this phase. We want to give you our special offer today. It is a free IT consultation as a thank you for being with us today. Roger and his team will make themselves available to perform a complimentary review of your IT, your hardware, your software, your network capability and capacity, governance, migration options. All of that is on the table. There's no obligation. It's just a new perspective on what you have, how efficient it is, and where you want it to go. You probably already have an idea of this, but a call with us may just confirm it or give you some ideas that you didn't consider. So please email us at webinars@avenuinsights.com, and we will follow up with you and make arrangements. We offer these, on another note, related note, we offer these educational programs frequently, so please keep an eye on your inbox for our next webinar about revenue discovery and recovery for jurisdictions and how data analytics makes that possible. One final slide for you. I want to make sure I give a big shout out to our guest presenter, Ben Miller. I appreciate your coming on today, Ben, and I encourage everybody on the line to seek out Ben's stories on GovTech and follow him on social media. He's always got a balanced and an insightful perspective, and GovTech really is the only go-to publication for understanding technology issues specifically in state and local government. So that's the end of today's webinar. Thank everybody for participating, and I hope you have a wonderful day.